Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our first immigration seminar from the City of Dearborn Heights. We have our mayor present. We have several of our attorneys that are present and sitting at the podium. I'm going to open it up for the mayor to introduce the city, Mayor Bill Bazzi, and then we're going to go by the line, and every lawyer is going to introduce themselves and their telephone number and their contact information.
Thank you, Mr. Farinha. Welcome. One of the things that we actually, for the last, few years, a lot of residents, they come through our city hall to my office, and they ask a lot of questions. We have a lot of immigrants, people that immigrated from various countries to our city in Dearborn Heights. So a lot of people have been asking about immigration laws. So Mr. Farinha put this event together so we can answer any questions. And I know we have several people here in the audience, and we welcome any of the questions, or the attorneys will welcome any questions that you guys ask. So I'm proud to have our first. This is our first ever event that we actually have attorneys, that can ask. You can ask, and they'll answer your questions. So I appreciate all the attorneys that came in here. And actually, they volunteered to come in here, so I appreciate you guys coming, taking the time to do this for our residents. So with that, move to Mr. Saad.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Hussein Saad. I'm the Assistant Corporation Counsel here with the City of Dearborn Heights and also owner of Saad Law PLLC. I'm pleased to be here. We're with several other attorneys to discuss immigration law.
Hello, I'm Reem Krazat. I'm a partner at Dagger Krazat Immigration Law in Dearborn, and I'm happy to be here.
And your phone number?
You can reach me at 313-565-6581.
Hi, I'm Renee Dagger. I'm a partner at Dagger Krazat Immigration Law. We've been a law firm that's been in practice for over 30 years. I've been in practice over 30 years, and our law firm's been open since 2015 as partners. My telephone is the same as Reem's, so 313-565-6581. If you have any questions, you can call for an appointment for consultation.
Hello, my name is Mazen Gaith. I am the principal at Gaith Law PLLC. I also work in immigration, and I've been doing this for about 17 years. My office is located in Dearborn, and my contact number is 313-486-0120.
Good evening. My name is Attorney Roger Farinha. I'm Corporation Counsel, Dearborn Heights, and we really wanted to provide a service. We have well over 50% of our city is diverse and have different nationalities. And we wanted to make open and available a presentation on immigration law in the United States. And we are opening it up to different attorneys, different visitors, and our website for our city, so our residents can have access and ask questions and contact our lawyers that are here today. We thank you for your time. I'm going to start the presentation by turning it over to Renee, Attorney Renee Dagger.
Hi, good evening. So we've put together just a small summary of concepts in immigration law that cover non-immigrant visas, immigrant visas, deportation, removal, employment immigration. First of all, it's very important to know that immigration law is one of the most complex areas of law out there. It is very, very regulatory and very complex. So we want to be sure that anybody listening to this, seeks attorney counsel before proceeding with filing any petitions or applications with USCIS or the Department of State. I'm going to start with non-immigrant visas. So the one you know most about is probably the visitor visa, and that's for people that want to come to the United States for the purpose of visiting. There is something called a visa waiver. There are about 56 countries that do not require a visa to come to the United States to visit, but most other countries do require a visa. The application is made through the Department of State, and you must attend an interview in most cases at a U.S. embassy that is in your country. Generally speaking, you want to be able to show that either you can support yourself or that you have a family member in the United States that will support you during your visit, and you need to prepare an affidavit of support for that purpose. The consular officer, when adjudicating B-1 visas, is looking primarily to know whether the person's intention of coming to the United States is to visit. So they look at your ties to your home country, your relatives that you're leaving at home, your job that you're leaving at home, your property you're leaving there, to assure that you will come to the U.S. and visit and then depart. Most visitor visas are denied because the embassy officer does not believe that the person will return to their home country, that they will try to stay here. However, in trying to stay here, there aren't a whole lot of options to do so legally. So it is important that your relatives do use the visitor visa to visit and return to their home country. There are opportunities for visitor visa extensions. If you do need to do that, you must file your extension before your visitor visa status in the U.S., which is found on something called an I-94, expires. And USCIS processing time, which we'll talk a lot about, is very long for visitor visa extensions. It's about a year. But USCIS can only give 6 months extension. So it's also important to realize that even though you filed for your extension, USCIS may not adjudicate it before the actual time you've asked for is expired. In that case, you need to file another extension. This is one example of how immigration law is complicated, and that people often think, oh, I filed and I'm waiting, so I must be fine. But that's not the case. Another very popular non-immigrant visa is the student visa. There are J1s, M1s, and F1s. Most people use the F1 status. A student applying for an F1 visa needs to obtain admission to a U.S. university, need to prove to the university they can afford the tuition, and that they have the money to live on in the United States without being employed. The university will issue them an I-20, which they will take to the U.S. Embassy and apply for the student visa. Again, the embassy officer does assess the intent of the person applying for the visa. Do they intend to study and then return to their country? So a lot of denials are based on lack of intent for that. So you want to be prepared at the embassy to discuss why you will study and return to your country. After that, employment-based visas, there's a long list. It's kind of like alphabet soup. There's H-1B, L-1, E-1, E-2, O-1, P-1. It just kind of goes on and on. I do employment-based immigration. It's what I do most of. H-1Bs are visas for professionals that are coming to work in the United States. A U.S. employer must petition for them. The job must require at least a bachelor's degree or higher. So not that the person has the degree, they of course do need to have it, but the job has to require it. So for example, you couldn't do an H-1B for a landscape worker. You can do an H-1B for a computer programmer or a attorney or a pharmacist or that kind of thing, an engineer. O1 and O2, O1 is an extraordinary ability alien, and there are some different categories. The one I do most of is the entertainment visas. O1s and P1s are groups or people that come to perform in the United States. And then L1 is an intercompany transferee. So for example, if you have one company in the United States and a related company overseas, and the two companies are related by at least 50% joint ownership, you can transfer employees from overseas to the US. The R1 visa is for religious workers. So those are nuns, priests, religious teachers, and that sort of thing. H-2B are similar to like H-1, except these are for non-professional positions. H-2Bs require that your company needs somebody for like seasonal work or a one-time need based on a huge contract, or what we call a peak load need. So you'll see a lot of H-2Bs in things like landscaping, resorts that are only open for a certain part of the year, resort towns that have restaurants that are extremely busy in a certain part of the year. These are extremely complicated visas. There is a lottery at the Department of Labor, which is the first step. So there are only 33,000 of these visas granted every year for the first half and the second half, so a total of 66,000. If you get picked in the lottery, and then you file your H with USCIS, there's a cap on that too. So I mean, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So there's a lottery system where they sort you, and then there's a cap and another sort of lottery. So it's basically two lottery type processes to get these visas. And so people bringing in landscapers and things like that, it's a big thing in like January through April to get those cases in and hope that your employer can bring the workers that he needs to do his business.
Renee, if I
Yeah.
may interrupt and ask a question. If someone in their country was looking, would you recommend would you be available for attorneys in countries to contact you and ask specific questions for their clients there? Is that a possibility?
Yes, if there are companies that are looking like L visa or E visa to open businesses in the U.S., then yes.
Okay, and what if someone had a question about an immigrant visa, and they had a brother, a sister, or a parent, and they came to a lawyer, say in Beirut or Lebanon? Would you be able to talk with the Lebanese attorney to answer questions, or can they contact you?
Yes, of course. We can do a consultation.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, no problem. H-2A visas are just like H-2B visas, but they're for agricultural work. So picking cherries in Michigan, what did they do? Winemaking was one. That was the one that was a big one. Big vineyards, grapes. E-1s and E-2s are investor visas and treaty trader visas. So investor visas, like if a company outside the U.S. wants to open a company in the U.S. or a person outside of the U.S. wants to invest and open a company in the U.S., that's possible, but only for certain countries. There has to be a treaty between the U.S. and that country. So for example, there is no treaty between the U.S. and Lebanon, so e-visas are not available for Lebanon. E2 is a treaty trader, and that's a company that's simply doing trade between the U.S. and, let's say, Canada. So they have to be doing a certain volume of trade between the U.S. and Canada to transfer employees in to help with their business here in the U.S. And then there's the TN visa, which is specific to Canada and Mexico. This is based on the NAFTA treaty, and this is a set group of jobs that only Canadians and Mexicans can apply for TN to do those jobs. So there are Canadian engineers and Mexican engineers that don't have to go through the H-1B, they can do the TN. The only other thing about the H-1B I forgot to tell you is that also has a lottery. So there are only 65,000 H-1Bs granted every fiscal year, and companies scramble to apply for this lottery and get chosen. They're very costly visas. The costs for employers, are a couple $1,000s to apply and filing fees. And, it's a big thing. In March, you register all your lottery employees, and then they run the lottery and you hope for the best. Let's see. So I think Reem is going to talk about TPS and deferred enforced departure?
So these two types of relief are kind of hybrid. They're not non-immigrant, they're not immigrant. They are temporary relief for people experiencing hardships from their countries of origin. So TPS is temporary protected status. And the benefit of TPS is granted to nationals of certain countries that are experiencing ongoing armed conflict, environmental disasters, or extraordinary conditions. You have to meet certain requirements in order to be eligible for TPS in terms of physical presence in the U.S. and when you entered. Currently, the countries that are designated for temporary protected status are Afghanistan, Myanmar, Cameroon, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Haiti, Honduras, Nepal, Nicaragua, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, and most recently, Palestine. I'm sorry.
No, not Palestine.
Yemen is the last one for temporary protected status. And with temporary protected status, you will not be removed from the United States regardless of your non-immigrant visa being expired. You get to stay here, live here, and you'll be issued a work authorization, which will allow you to find employment. And that's TPS. Then move on to another category that is deferred enforced departure. This also is a relief from removal that is granted to certain countries designated by the United States President. Currently, the countries that are designated for deferred enforced departure are Liberia, Hong Kong, and Palestine. So Palestine is been designated for deferred enforced departure, not the TPS. I misspoke earlier. So what does this mean? This means that the time that if you meet the qualifications, the physical presence requirements, you can remain in the United States, you will be protected from removal and deportation, and you will also be issued a work authorization.
And I think it's important to point out about these two statuses is that they are not permanent. They end. So basically, once the president decides that TPS or the deferred enforced departure is no longer necessary, that country is safe to return to, they take away that status, in which case then the person generally will have to leave the U.S.
Reem, may I ask a question? If someone has from Palestine and they have a deferred status, can they travel on that deferred status visa?
They can do an I-130.
I think they can.
Yeah, they can do what's called it's called a parole. It's called an advanced parole. They can travel.
Okay, and what about if we have F1 students with a deferred, is that possible?
So for example, part of the reason they also did implement something else for F1 students. There is a new emergency work authorization program. So what happens is when somebody's country falls apart, then the money that they're being sent by their parents or relatives in that country dries up. And so they can no longer afford their tuition. They can no longer afford to like go to school without working to pay their expenses in the U.S. So that's the purpose of TPS and DED and this new emergency work authorization for Palestinian students or students from areas that are undergoing a lot of conflict.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions? We're going to keep going, but young ladies. Yes, but she won't be on camera, but she can use the microphone, just turn it on. And you can translate for us.
اسألني شو سؤالك؟
أسألك أنت وأنت تجاوب.
وجهي السؤال وأنا أشرح.
السلام عليكم. أنا هنا قادمة على اللجوء صار لي 6 سنوات وصادفت الميجريشن يأجلوني كل سنة، يأجلوني كل سنة، يأجلوني.
شو حالتك؟
وضعي تعبان حيل، أنا وضع هي أول مرة تعبان.
Use the microphone.
عندي
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
عندي
She
أولادي.
has, بس يعني she has been in the US for 6 years. Okay, كملي.
عندي أولادي، يعني صار لي هاي 7 سنين أنا ما شايفة أولادي. أنا تعبت، نفسيتي تعبت.
ولادك وين؟
أولادي بالعراق كلهم، زوجي بالعراق، أنا
Her
هون
husband,
لحالي.
her husband and her children in Iraq, and she's alone here.
يعني لحالي. خلصت من ذي ال6 سنوات أشتغل يعني،
She's
وتعبت.
working here.
تعبت كلش هواي، يعني نفسيتي تعبت. أريد بس أشوف أولادي، يعني بيشكوني يسهلوا لي الأمر، أشوف أولادي، يعطوني فيزا، يعني يعطوني جواز أروح لغير دولة ألتقي بأولادي، مثل بالأردن، مثل بتركيا، بس أشوف أولادي. يعني أنا بس أريد أشوفهم، يعني ما كان عندي بيبي عمره 12 سنة.
She wanna see
هسه
her children. Okay, حالتك شو؟
One thing I picked up on, sorry that
Yes,
I'm
go
late,
ahead.
everybody.
And please introduce yourself, Rod, and
Yes.
your telephone number and who you are. You can,
Yes.
no, just use the microphone, turn the microphone
Oh, that's right.
on.
I'm not used to this.
Turn the microphone on.
I think it's on, right?
It's yellow, the light's on?
Yeah, lights on. So, السلام عليكم حجي. اسمي رائد مراد. And أنا محامي immigration. بعمل immigration بس بعمل كتير criminal مع immigration. Now ما بعمل كتير لجوء. ما بعمل كتير لجوء بس pretty much the only thing I wanted to add was I didn't think Mohammed said it. She has a pending asylum case. And she's been getting, it sounds like she's been getting work authorization. She has a social security card. She's been here for 6 years. And my understanding is that her family's in Iraq. And at this point, she's so tired that even if she were to be deported to another country, she's just most concerned with reuniting with her family. And it sounds like she understands that she can't go back to Iraq because that's going to be jeopardizing her asylum claim, is what I understood her to.
That's fine.
يعني أنتم مدام يعني جزء من الميجريشن، أنا أريد أوصل صوتي للميجريشن. أنا أريد أحد يعني يوصل صوتي للميجريشن. يعني أنا عندي أطفال، عندي بيبي. والله يعني قبل كم يوم قال لي ماما أنا ما أعرفك أنت شو تحبين وشو تكرهين. يعني هاي الكلمة خلتني ما يعني خلتني هدتني، لأن ابني خليته عمره 9 سنوات. هسه ابني صغير كبير. زوجي مريض عنده السكري والضغط والقلب وتعبان. يعني أنا إذا صار عليهم شيء بالعراق وأنا هنا يعني ما يعني أريدكم بس توصلون صوتي إلهم. أريد بس يعطوني شيء ألتقي بأولادي، بس يعني أريد أشوف أولادي. يعني أنا و6 سنوات خلصت هنا، أنا لا ترفهت ولا طلعت ولا مشيت ولا كله شغل، من الشغل للبيت ومن البيت للشغل. يعني كلش تعبت. يعني أنا هم أهل الإنسانية، هم الملاذ الآمن للناس التعبانة المضطهدة المشردة. يعني أنا أريدكم توصلون صوتي. أنا المحامي مالي كلش خوش محامي شاطر، محامي كنت شاطر وكلش خوش محامي وزين يعني، ويعني ما يحب لا كذب ولا يحب اللف والدوران، يعني دغري. بس كل مرة يأجلوني. هسه مأجليني 25 شهر السابع بعد. يعني أنا ما أقدر يعني. تعبت كثير تعبت.
I think we need to ask a question. Is her asylum application pending with the asylum office affirmatively, or is she in removal proceedings in immigration court?
طلبك اللي قدمتيه
مال اللجوء.
ايه
حجي سؤال.
بس يأجلوني.
انت رحتي على شيكاغو وعملتي انترفيو ولا لا؟
يا
اوكي. وبعد الانترفيو قالوا لك لا صح؟
لا ما قالوا لي لا.
بالانترفيو بعد الانترفيو
سووا لي بس تمييز، سووا لي تمييز يعني. اي يعني المحكمة سووا لي تمييز
Sounds like she's in removal.
او تأجيل بالتمييز. يعني ما قالوا لي لا رأسا، يعني ما قالوا لي لا، ما رافضين.
حاجة أنت رحتي على المحكمة وقفتي قدام القاضي شيء؟
ايه رحت على ميجريشن شيكاغو.
رحتي على المحكمة بديترويت؟
لا بس بشيكاغو. بديترويت يأجلون المحكمة. كانت كورونا بأيام
بس هن حولوا
الفيروس.
ملفك من شيكاغو حولوك على ديترويت.
اي حولوني هنا وصارت الكورونا وصار تأجيل. اي أجلوني.
ما رحتي على المحكمة؟
لا ما رحت.
شيلين وين؟
Sounds like her
يعني
master's
كل
been
موعد
getting
أنا يأجلوني، كل موعد أتهيأ ويأجلون.
I can answer, Roger.
Thank you.
Is it better that I respond in English, or should I address her directly in Arabic? I could do that,
if
but
you-
what do you recommend?
You do both, is that possible? Arabic.
Okay.
Because we have a
Arabic?
unique,
Okay.
we have a unique ability here with our language and our attorneys and our city to respond. And I prefer to respond in Arabic, and then, yeah, then we'll explain it in English for our website.
Very good. Okay. بدي أقول لك إنه بدك تحكي مع المحامي تبولك أنت، هي أول شيء المهم بينك وبينه. أنا بس أعطيكي جواب حكي general.
يا
بدي
ريت.
أقول لك كم شغلة. إنه أول شيء المحكمة بديترويت الإميغريشن كورت هي عندها كتير ديلاي لأنه في ناس كتير بالإميغريشن كورت. هلا بديترويت الإميغريشن كورت عندهم 20,000 active cases وعندهم 5 judges وواحد منهم جديد. So بعد دوبر ببلش. Okay. So هذا الشيء لكل واحد، مش إنه هني عم يعملوا شيء ضدك أنت، ما تحسي هيك. هلا إذا بدك الكيس تبولك فيك تحكي مع المحامي تبولك إنه في طريقة إنه نكتب بالورقة الريسبونس هيك بتقيمي واحد من الهيرينجز تبولك. So إذا أنت ناطرة لأول هيرينج في المحامي يعملها in writing بكتبها، وهذا بيروح الوقت بيمشيها أسرع.
ايه هو أنا بدي أمشيها أسرع.
Yeah.
بيسرع.
اوكي. احكي مع المحامي تبولك ان كل واحد الكيس تبوله مهم إله. بس لا عم جاوبك انه it's a general response.
بس إذا ما صير زحمة يعني عليك وهاي تكتبي لي إياها كتابة حتى أنا أخذها للمحامي، لأن المحامية أمريكي يعني ما أقدر أتفاهم وياهم، أخذ مترجم وكل ما أروح له أنا مترجم. أريد يعني بتكتبي لي إياها على ورقة ونطيه إياه هو يعني يقدر أن يساعدني أو هم يساعدوني.
Sure, I can talk to her after.
اوكي رح تحكي معك هلا بس تخلص ان شاء الله.
تسلم. شكرا أشكركم.
The gist of my response in English is that the immigration court in Detroit is very backlogged at this point. They have about 20,000 cases and 5 judges. One has recently been appointed. So the backlog is just the nature of the system. It's not specific to her in particular.
Great.
And there probably really isn't a solution to her situation. Like, she won't really be able to see her family until she resolves her immigration court, right?
Is there any particular time that we can ask a question? Or?
If you'd like to now, I'm going to have this young lady go, then sir, then you go next? Okay, thank you.
Hi, how are you? My name is مياد الناصري. طبعا أنا كلش أشكر حضوركم هنا، لأن حضوركم يعني شوية أسعدنا يعني أكثر، لأن إحنا هنا يعني شوية مثل مشون مثل أكو يقول غرقان وتعلق له بالشاي شيء. يعني أسعدتوني والله. أنا هسه من دخلت هنا حسيت أكو أمان يعني بعد أكثر والله بوجودكم إن شاء الله. أنا نفس القصة يعني أنا بالعراق عندي أولادي هم هناك. أنا هم جيت وعملت المعاملة مالتي على مود الجرين كارد، لأن أنا شو هناك مضطهدة وكنت مهددة بقتل يعني بسبب يعني كنت ضد أحزاب كانوا هناك بالعراق، تعرفون بعد أمور العراق والأحزاب وهيك. فقدمت نفس الحالة وصار لي أنا تقريبا 6 سنوات أنا على هاي المكان، كل شيء ماكو جديد. المحكمة من محكمة المحكمة تأجيل هم كذلك، وأنا هم عندي أطفال هناك.
She has the same issue, but she's thrilled in Iraq because of some parties there, and she has been 6 years here. So the same issue as the ma'am here. عم بيأجلوا
بالضبط. هسه أنا
الطلب.
بالبداية أنا قابلت بشيكاغو، بعدين حولوني محكمة. بعدين محكمة ثانية.
في هلا موعد محكمة قريب.
عندي موعد محكمة على السنة الجاية هسه.
next year.
بس يعني هم
بدك تسألي أنت.
بدي أسأل يعني أنتوا أصحاب خبرة يعني مثلا يقولوا ما شاء الله أنتوا كلكم عمالقة بالمحاماة، بس أريد أعرف يعني هل أكو نتيجة؟ أنا هم عندي طفلة عمرها فتت 8 سنوات، هسه بنتي عمرها 15 سنة، والله ما تعرفني يعني من أريد أحكي وياها بالكاميرا بالتليفون ما تباوع لي.
What can she do?
يعني أبد ما تعرفني أبد يعني وعندي أولاد هناك كذلك يعني الأمور كلش تعب. هنا أنا جاي أشتغل بعمل بيبي ستر ودرست هنا جاي أدرس هم ويعني هم نفس الشيء من الشغل للبيت، بس النفسية يعني تعبت والله تعبت صار لي يعني هم نفس الحالة. بس أريد مثل فد نتيجة تعطيني أكو أمل مثل إن شاء الله أكو أمل أنتظر على السنة الجاية إن شاء الله بلكي خير أقول يعني ذا أكو. هل تشوفون يعني أنتوا أكو أمل إحنا ولا شنو يعني هذا المكان قعدتنا شنو؟
ما تفضلت
بالضبط.
Mrs. Reem حكت عن الموضوع.
Anyone?
Mrs. Reem, the same case I think as
I tell her to be patient.
خليكي صبورة.
Immigration court is backlogged. It is what it is. It seems to me from what she outlined that she's probably waiting on an individual hearing at this point. After that hearing, she will have some relief. She will know one way or the other.
أنا هسه قال لي المحامي مالتي هاي السنة الجاية آخر سنة، يعني هذا المحامي الثاني كان عندي محامي وهسه محامي ثاني خليت واحد ثاني هم محامي معروف يعني لما تعرفوه اسمه موسى السيد معروف اللبناني هم خوش محامي زين، بس آخر شيء هالسنة راح تجي. بس يعني هي الحالة النفسية تعبنا والله يعني ما أعرف هيك هذا ولو هي كانت أسباب كورونا عطلت كل شيء، بس شو يعني أريد بس حرف واحد يقولوا لي أكو أمل وانتظري. يعني أنتوا تعرفون إحنا أصحاب أولاد جهال يعني هناك بالعراق، أنا ما عندي أحد بس ابن وياي والباقين كلهم هناك مخليتهم، الظروف كل صعبة بالعراق. يعني هل أكو نتيجة ولا لا؟
Anyone respond?
مثل ما قالت Mrs. Reem قالت إنه بس كوني صبورة.
إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله بس لموعد استماع الجلسة ولا يطلع
أنا كلش أشكر منكم ثانك يو يعني على يعني وسع صدركم للناس وأنتوا البركة والله شكرا جزيلا ثانك يو.
I wanted to address because I think what she's looking for is to say somebody give her some type of glimmer of hope that that her case is going to be approved. I think the one thing that I think everybody needs to understand is every case is fact specific to the individual, and regardless of whether or not two people may share the same type of issues, their circumstances obviously are gonna differ, and as may the outcome as will the outcome of their case. And I think like Reem said, I think right now the best thing they can do is just follow their attorney's advice and be patient, and eventually they will get their day in court in front of the judge, and obviously you can hope for the best at that point. But I mean, as far as a guarantee of what the outcome of their case is, I don't think anybody can give them that.
Is there a website? Is there a website they can look at? I mean, the USCIS website, obviously, but is there to track? What would the procedure be to track a political asylum case or a status of what's proceeding? How would they go about doing that?
Both of the ladies today who had questions, their matters are pending before the Detroit Immigration Court. So there is a case status update that you can get at the EOIR website. So it's the Detroit Immigration Court, or you can go to the Executive Office of Immigration Review, case status update. And you'll see that if you put in your A number, you will get a status of when your hearing is. But both ladies are represented by counsel, so they've been advised of their next hearing.
Okay. Sir, would you, if you can stand at the podium, we can't get you on camera, but we can hear your voice. Okay.
Mine are pretty general questions, but I grew up in Dearborn Heights long before it became Dearborn Heights. The first guy that I shook hands with was Mr. Canfield, so that kind of ages me a little bit. But I had some questions about, I run a company. We have about 100 plus employees, and you made a comment about filings. If there's so much onerous effort to bother with filings, why even bother? Since with all the backlog, there are really no consequences. So if I need a truck driver, I just kind of put out the word, and a guy knows how to drive the truck, that's fine. Never touches immigration. Life is good. I save thousands of bucks. I get a good truck driver. I've got maybe 50 or 60 shall we say, immigrants. If you can't understand their language, I don't know how you want to define an immigrant, but, and they're Albanians, Lithuanians, Mexican, and I try and learn like yakshimash. That means, hey, you look great in Albanian. That's great. You know, you try and keep a positive outlook. But I guess my questions are, why go through beyond wanting to be a good, outstanding, law-abiding employer? You just outlined why it's not worth the effort. And I should just bring them on board, and life is good, and the consequences. So far, I haven't had one person in 30 to 40 years even ask about my employees, about immigration, or what their status is, or their green cards. Like, I have no idea what a green card is. And, you know, I was just taking notes while you're doing that. So, like, I'm looking for a truck driver. I'll just put out the word on the street and test him, and life is good. And of course, he has to have a license and everything. But, you know, that's where, right now, there's not even any proof. You can't even prove if anyone is a citizen or not. So an illegal could be a citizen, or they're not a citizen. So they can, if I wanted to vote, I can go to and register to vote, and an illegal could register to vote because it says right on there.
Absolutely not.
Well, the question is, are you a citizen? They don't enforce that. There's no enforcement, so you could just simply say, no, you know, you just check yes.
Okay, so let me address your first question about why an employer would.
Who's speaking?
Renee Dagger.
Renee right here, yes.
Oh, okay, I didn't see you talking, okay.
Okay, so let me address your first question about why an employer would go through this to hire people with valid work authorization. For one thing, yes. So there are a lot of immigrants that have green cards, that have work authorization through various means, like these ladies here. There are a lot of immigrants that have work authorization. But an employer is required to file what's called I-9 on every employee that they have, U.S. citizen and foreign. And you are required to keep records. And there are stiff fines and stiff penalties for not doing that.
So far, no consequences, so.
Okay. And you've been lucky. And
40 years. Yeah, a lot of luck.
There are hotels that have contacted me that have been audited, where the Department of Labor or the USCIS or ICE go through their documents to determine which employee have valid work authorization and which do not. And there are very stiff fines into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for these violations. Now, you're right in that there are not a whole lot of audits. There are audits, though. I've had companies being audited. I've represented companies during audits. You know, we've negotiated down their fines if they have penalties. You know, there is a process for all that. But that really does exist. So if you do have a company and you're not filling out your I-9s and you're not keeping your records, there is a possibility of being audited. That is why companies will go through the legal immigration process for people that don't have valid work authorization, a green card, or are a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so.
And then the issue of voting, I'm going to have Rod.
Oh, I got a
Sorry,
couple of
yeah.
questions on that. Like, is Dearborn Heights have a sanctuary city status? What is their status on immigration on that? Is ICE called when you have someone that is a miscreant and does bad and he's an illegal immigrant? Does he get, do you call ICE or don't you?
You'd have to ask the city.
Right.
I'm a private attorney. I don't know what the
Okay.
city's policies
Well,
are.
okay, I'm just,
But I wanted to jump in and answer some of your first questions. So if you, I think, use the example of a trucking company. If you hire truckers, those truckers are required to have a CDL. If you have a CDL in Michigan, you have a driver's license. Currently, unfortunately, if you are an undocumented immigrant, AKA illegal, you're not able to get a Michigan driver's license. So
that's wrong.
Trust
It's
me.
$40 and you can get a fake driver's license very easily
wow.
online.
So-
And you could show that to me and I say, okay, you
So
know how
I
to drive
think-
the truck? And he drives it.
I mean, we got a panel of what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 attorneys. I think all of us would probably come to an agreement that a fake ID, if you're ever in a situation where law enforcement or anybody has any bit of authority comes across that fake ID, that's a felony. You're committing a
Well,
crime.
that's the driver's fault, not me as an employer.
Right.
If he shows me a fake ID, how am I, if it's got the glossiness and it's got all the proper little fancy things on it,
Right. Well,
There
I
is
guess
a-
the
and he
answer
could
is.
drive the truck, I'm happy. You
I'm
don't-
going to
There
move
is a
on.
system called E-Verify that employers do use to verify people's documents. And it is a system that employers sign up for and that they use to put people's documents through and verify that their work authorization and their ability to work in the United States is legal.
And why should I be worried about that? If the guy can drive the truck and he's a nice guy, why should I go through all that filings when you just told me that's not really checked out?
But it can be, and there are fines and penalties for not doing so. So
Right,
I
but-
think that there are plenty of employers that are concerned enough about that, and I've seen the fines and penalties be very, very high.
Well, I'm trembling in my shoes.
Okay.
But after 40 years, I haven't heard anything about that. But the citizenship bothers me because you could just sign up when I registered to vote. And you can register to vote as many times as you want. I've registered to vote with twice on this hand and once on this hand because what do? At absentee, they check your signatures. Well, who makes those people that check the signatures signature experts? That seems so weak.
If I may address that point,
Sure.
there's very serious consequence to false claim to U.S. citizenship. It is a permanent bar from any future immigration benefit.
It's not enforced at all.
Actually, it is. We've represented individuals who've been charged with making a false claim to U.S. citizenship.
If you
And
go online,
sometimes
it is
it's
so
unknowingly.
rare. It is so rare.
Well, let me ask you something, Reem. If someone is found, even if they have citizenship, to have lied or put false documentation or vote, can that U.S. citizenship be removed?
Sure, that they can be placed in denaturalization procedures.
If I'm lying on the actual naturalization application is a 10-year felony.
There's serious consequences. These things are not taken very lightly.
Well, you could say what the felonies are and how long you serve, but whether that's actually served, there's people that, committed vast crimes and they're out on bail in 1 hour. The consequences, you could tell me all the penalties there are, but the consequences of what actually happens almost never happens. The last time I went down to register to vote, I asked them, how do you know that I'm not an illegal alien? Well, you showed your driver's license. Well, you don't need citizenship or any proof to get a driver's license. You need an address and a place where you live for a couple of months.
That's not true, sir.
Well, what is true then?
So, you guys want me to?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so in order to get a driver's license, the Secretary of State, when you give them their license, do you know they're able to tell what your citizenship is at the Secretary of State, whether you're a green card holder, whether you just are here on some sort of non-immigrant visa and have work authorization? They're able to determine that at the Secretary of State, they have a save number that actually it correlates directly with what your citizenship status is. So ultimately, it sounds like your frustration is generally with the system and you're sort of asking questions to sort of elicit some of the system's mishaps. But I guess what I want to reassure you with is, sounds like at least 3 of us on this panel have represented people or defended people who have been charged with or accused of some of these things you're saying that aren't happening. And I guess to address your point on bail, it's sort of a criminal issue, so I'm excited to jump in here, and I'm sure Mr. Farinha, Mr. Saad may have something else, but, as a defense attorney, what I tell people is we're defenders of the Constitution. If you believe in America and you believe in the Constitution, you believe that everybody has the right to good representation, which also includes the presumption of innocence unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So when we talk about bail, we're talking about holding somebody and confining them in a jail while they're cloaked with this presumption of innocence. So ultimately, what comes into factors here is their ties to the community, their lack of violent history, and sometimes you may hear of a case on the news where, well, this guy had a violent history and this guy had this, and they still let him out. Bail is subject to review on a case-by-case basis, so it's super easy to see a headline and jump the gun and feel that the system's failing us, and I don't think the system's perfect. But I do think that some of your concerns, if you were to maybe talk to one of us more or look into more of what's actually going on, I don't think some of your concerns would still be there.
Well, this might be a little bit of far afield, but like when you look at the riots and the looting that took place in Washington, D.C., toppling statues and all that was on film. They knew who did that.
Right.
And when they had the thing that happened January 6th, guys going around wearing a buffalo hat, and the guards are opening the doors for them. There's no riots or anything inside that building for the most part. The police are helping them, and yet those people are still in jail.
Sir,
So it's all kind of relative of how you look at it.
I have to move on with our thing. Thank you so much.
I know
for
we're
your
talking politics
questions.
now, and
Yes, yes.
you don't want to touch that base with
Well,
a
we have to
10-foot
move
pole.
on. We have a lot of issues to finish up, but thank you, sir.
Okay,
And
well,
have a seat. I'm gonna move on.
okay, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
sir.
for letting me speak. Take care.
Okay. Maza.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover very briefly the topic of family-based immigration. Family-based immigration basically refers to the process of sponsoring a qualifying member to go ahead and emigrate to the United States, where the petitioner is a green card holder or a U.S. citizen. And the purpose of family-based immigration, the main purpose is family reunification. In order to qualify or be eligible to emigrate to the United States, you'd have to fall into one of 3 categories. You would have to be either the husband or wife of a U.S. citizen. You would have to be the unmarried child under 21 of a U.S. citizen, or you would have to be the parents of a U.S. citizen who is at least 21 years old to be able to petition for you. The general process of immigration starts with filing what's called a Form I-130 petition, and that is where a petitioner, namely a U.S. citizen or green card holder, would file on behalf of an immediate relative. And that, in that petition, you would have to either, if you were a family member, an immediate relative, you'd have to prove the family relationship by submitting the relevant documentation, i.e. birth certificate or other documentation to prove that there is a family relationship. Or if you are the spouse of a U.S. citizen, then you would have to prove and submit a marriage license as well as other documentation to show that that marriage is based on a bona fide relationship and not solely based on a benefit-based relationship where a person marries someone just for the purpose of acquiring a immigration benefit. Usually once the I-130 petition is filed, a person is issued a priority date, and that date would be the date that USCIS or immigration actually receives your document, and then you would be able to track however long it would be for immigration to process your petition based on that date. Like Renee said earlier, as with many other visas, there are limits to certain types of visas, even in the family-based petitions. However, where petitions are based on spousal relationship, there are no limits on the number of visas issued. And usually you would track your priority date based on a visa bulletin, which is filed on a monthly basis. Every month that is updated, and you can log into the Department of State website, and you can see the progress of your petition based on the category that you fall in. The two types of processing when it comes to family-based petitions are either counselor processing, which is the process of where the intending immigrant is outside of the United States and the petitioner is in the United States, and they file the immigrant petition. Once that petition gets processed, then those documents go to the National Visa Center, where the remaining visa applications and other auxiliary petitions are filed along with additional evidence. Once those documents are approved, then the file is transferred to whichever responsible embassy the petition falls under. And then the embassy would, at that point, schedule an interview, have an interview with the immigrant, and then issue a visa and hopefully have that immigrant immigrate to the United States. The other type would be an adjustment of status. The adjustment of status pertains to a petitioner and a beneficiary who is in the United States, and instead of having that person leave and then process from outside of the United States, the adjustment of status allows that person to go ahead and those documents to be filed from within the United States. And once those documents are filed, there's usually an interview with USCIS, and if the interview goes well, then that person is issued a green card and they can stay in the United States and live here permanently. The majority, as far as the wait times, obviously there's, like Reem said as well, there's a backlog to a lot of the applications that are currently pending. Recently, there's been a change, and a lot of the petitions from certain countries are being processed a lot faster than what they would normally be processed. But in general, there is somewhat of a substantial backlog, especially depending on your status and the country from which you are looking to immigrate. But as far as any type of family-based immigration in general, or family-based immigration, usually its purpose is to unify families and allow them to, reside together and make that process as, for lack of better words, as painless as possible. When sometimes the backlog is a bigger issue than a lot of the actual problems that are ongoing in that country.
I'm going to ask Rod if you could talk a little bit, because I know we've got we'll have a lot of people listening, with the criminal side and the consequences of criminal actions, or people who are green cards, non-green, no permanent resident status as yet, or if they're applying for citizenship or they have a criminal record. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, people can touch on the issues, and then we're going to switch to Renee about sometimes clearing up the past if you have a situation without specifying.
Awesome. Yeah, so
Clearing up a criminal record past.
I think the criminal attorney would probably be better to speak to that.
Well, I'll go to what I mean. Please,
So
thank you.
ultimately, when you're charged with a crime as a U.S. citizen versus a non-citizen, the consequences are always going to be different. The U.S. citizen, when they're charged with a crime, the worst that they have to worry about is what that statute or what that law prescribes the punishment to be. So for example, if I'm charged with, a drinking and driving offense, for example. I know that the maximum possible punishment is 1 year in jail in the county jail here as a U.S. citizen. Now, the punishment, if I'm not a U.S. citizen for something like drinking and driving, maybe I could have used a more severe example, but just drinking and driving still has terrible consequences for immigration purposes. But if I'm here on a green card and I get charged, let's use domestic violence, and I'm convicted of domestic violence, even though it's a misdemeanor, even though the judge is only going to sentence me to probation and give me some, classes to help get me back to where I need to be. And even if the prosecutors agree to dismiss the case after I've already pled guilty and do a term of probation, I could be deported if I'm a non-citizen. So if you're a non-citizen and you're charged with a crime or sometimes even a traffic offense, you may not realize that certain traffic offenses are misdemeanors and they carry horrible consequences. So I can break this down into two categories. Crime involving moral turpitude and an aggravated felony. Now let's talk about being a green card holder. If you're a green card holder, there are certain criminal convictions I guess you can afford to take without having your green card revoked. But if you're a non-green card holder and you're on some sort of visa, that's much more limited. So if I'm a green card holder and I'm charged with any sort of fraudulent offense, this could be minor shoplifting to mass counterfeit and safe breaking, anywhere in between. If the element of the crime has to do with fraud, and there is a petty exception, but other than that petty exception, and I'm convicted of that, or I plead guilty to that, even if it's a misdemeanor, I almost will certainly be placed in removal proceedings, even though I'm a green card holder, even though I've been here for 20 years as a green card holder, and I'm charged with, shoplifting, and that value is over $200. I'm convicted, I will definitely be placed in removal proceedings.
So Rod, you're saying if it's a crime of moral turpitude, would include anything involving a fraud?
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Such as?
The term crime involving moral turpitude, or the phrase, is actually I think it should be held void for vagueness, but it hasn't been. It sort of encompasses a ton of different things. The exact definition is inherent behavior that is so vile that it deprives a society and shocks their conscience, pretty much. Something along those lines. Now, the way it plays out with case law is any sort of fraudulent offense is almost always found to be a crime involving moral turpitude. So it's used as almost a catch-all, but the fraud element, anytime there's fraud, there's moral turpitude. So that's what you have to be careful. Anytime you come across somebody who's a green card holder, or they had a misdemeanor shoplifting, or something along the lines of using a credit card to do something poor, if a regular judge is giving a U.S. citizen community service and probation, that green card holder is going to get deported. With regard to the aggravated felony, it's usually if there's a felony that's punishable by up to 5 years or more, sometimes even less, given certain convictions, but you can almost guarantee to put yourself in removal proceedings. So if you're a non-citizen and you're convicted of a felony, I can't think of any felony that you can be convicted of and not be deported. So that's sort of the analysis I look to. But fraud is a really big deal. Now, if you're on just a tourist visa, almost anything can get that visa revoked. That's all discretionary. So if a plea to a disorderly person saves me as a green card holder, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to save me if I'm here on a fiancé visa and I haven't, adjusted my status yet. So I've seen certain things happen, and a lot of good people end up in tough situations where they make some poor choices, and the consequences for U.S. citizens may be minor, but for green card holders or non-citizens, horrible.
Thank you.
If I could just, one last
Yes.
sentence to wrap up. Now, sometimes you end up in a situation where you're already convicted. You went with any attorney, that attorney didn't really go over your rights with you, and you didn't really understand the consequences of, pleading guilty to this certain offense. There's case law under Padilla that allows you to at least file a motion and try to withdraw your plea and vacate that conviction. Now, this is not an expungement. A lot of people make the mistake of getting an expungement and thinking that's going to wipe it off. If you want to get rid of that criminal history, you have to go back, withdraw your plea, or appeal that case if you were found guilty at trial.
Thank you, Rod, very much. I'm going to talk on a couple of things, maybe. Mazen, you could.
Well, I just wanted to add, as far as the aggravated felonies, will almost make that person ineligible for a lot of the forms of relief. Because those forms of relief, a lot of them depend on discretion from the immigration judge. And then as far as the Padilla exception, as long as he wasn't informed of the immigration consequences, then that exception would apply.
After 2010.
I'm going to ask a question. For instance, we have a lot of young people that will carry guns, that will speed, commit reckless activity, having green cards, or in process that don't understand the immigration consequences in our cities. I'm not going to pick our one city, but in general. Maybe you guys could talk about this more serious traffic offenses and someone carrying a BB gun or a pistol, and there are other things that have
Roger, I
consequences.
can address some of those
Yes.
things. I can give like a general idea of what types of convictions would lead to deportation removals. So let's say you're here as a legal permanent resident, you've had your card and you're here comfortably. If you commit certain crimes, and it may be a misdemeanor, it may be something that you feel is non-consequential, will have very harsh consequences for you because of your immigration status. And please work with a criminal attorney and an immigration attorney together. And that's the best thing you can do for yourself in terms of before taking any plea or going to trial. I want to just touch on some of the criminal convictions that would affect your immigration status, even if you are a legal permanent resident in this country. Aggravated felonies. Some of the types of aggravated felonies are serious crimes like murder, rape, trafficking, firearm offenses, crimes of moral turpitude, dishonesty. I think you've addressed those pretty well. And then controlled substance violations. Very harsh consequence. The only exception to a controlled substance violation that would allow you to remain in the U.S. and keep your green card is having possession of 30 grams or less of marijuana. Anything else beyond that, you are removable, deportable, and probably can't return.
Would that include COT?
Absolutely.
COT is another
Schedule
serious Schedule 1. Yes, definitely. And firearm offenses, illegal possession, you need to have a license. Illegal possession and trafficking of firearms, which is a little bit more serious. Domestic violence offenses, and some of the bigger types of issues. Also, if there's any national security threat, terrorism, if you become a public charge, or if you travel and you stay outside of the United States for a year or more on your legal permanent resident, and you are a legal permanent resident on the entry, you may be placed in removal proceedings. So that being said, there is some relief that is available to legal permanent residents if they find themselves in removal and deportation proceedings. There's waivers, you file for asylum, cancellation of removal, and readjustment. But really, some of these very serious criminal convictions, there's no relief from removal.
Thank you. Could you guys touch a little bit on the other types of visas, say, just briefly, maybe an E or a trade visa, K visas, maybe L1, L2s, briefly at EB5 if we can.
Okay. Well, I did give a general overview of the alphabet soup of non-immigrant visas. So the E visa is again an investor visa or a treaty trader visa. It only is available to people from countries where there is a treaty between the U.S. and that country. So there's a list, and you look at the list and you see, and that treaty status is updated. The E investor does not require a specific amount of investment, but the investment must be proportional to the value of the business that you're investing in. So if the value of the business is very high, then your proportional investment can be lower. If if the value of the business is a very low value, like $100,000, you're probably going to have to invest most of that $100,000. The investment needs to be made or needs to be put in escrow before the visa is granted. So this bothers some people, but you know this. We have to show where the money came from
Is that
and,
source of,
and
source
how
of
it,
funds?
source of funds and path of funds. So where the money came from and how it got to the US business bank account. So if the person earned the money and has saved it over the years, we literally need to show in their bank account those savings over whatever number of years it took to save that much money, and then show how it was transferred to the US. If the person inherited the money, we then need to go back and look at how their parent or brother or sister earned that money. So there's a protection against people investing money that was gained by unlawful means. And immigration is very, very picky about this source of funds and path of funds. After that, you know, it does, the e-visa is granted for about 2 years, and then you have to do a renewal, and you need to show the US government that the business is operating, that it's employing workers, that it, you know, it is doing what you said it was gonna do. The treaty trader is very similar to the investor. It's just about doing trade. You have to show 50% of your trade, your international trade, is between the US and that country on the treaty list. So that's another. The L visa, as I said, is an intercompany transferee. It is often kind of used like an investor visa because you can open a new office in the United States. But there has to be at least 50% joint ownership between the US company and the foreign company.
Renee,
And
would-
the employee has to have worked there for at least 1 year out of the last 3 years.
Would that company, say a company in Beirut, if it just opened up, or if it's been opening up for a certain period of time before they could come and set up a branch?
Yeah, they have to be open at least a year, because you have to show that the executive or the manager, the person you're transferring in, has to have been employed at the foreign company for at least 1 year out of the last 3 years. And you've got to show that through employment records, which for people in certain countries is not that easy, because there are countries in which employment records are not cleanly kept. So you've got to show, you have to advise them before they start of the records they need to keep in order to meet this burden.
So that would mean it would be wise to have an attorney in your country working with you and then coordinate
Sure.
with a US attorney here.
And of course,
Possibly.
you would want to coordinate not only with the US attorney here, but you need a tax accountant, you need an accountant in your own country, you need to show your business records, your profit loss statements, any licenses the company needs to operate in that country.
Can they get a green card or permanent resident status from that?
Well, the e-visa, there's no path from the e-visa to a green card that's specific. So in general, people cannot apply for their own green card. There are some exceptions, but in general, that doesn't happen. The L visa does have a category that can lead to a green card. It is called an EB1 manager or an executive. And your case here, generally, when you open a new office in the US, they're going to give you an L1 for 1 year. And then you're going to have to file an extension and again, show that your business is doing what it's supposed to be doing, that it's employing US workers, that it has contracts, that it's working. And then after a year, if you can apply for this EB1. However, I'm going to give you a caveat which you may not like. USCIS is very, very tough on small business Ls. They are difficult cases. The denial rate is really, really high. Now, if you're Ford Motor Company and you're applying for an L visa for your managers or executives, you know, those cases are no-brainers. But for small businesses, I tell them that they have to set up substantial operations with a company organizational chart that shows that the managers or executives are not performing what we call first-line duties. First-line duties are like the day-to-day duties of a company, okay? So managers or executives on L visa cannot perform these duties, at least not and move forward with a green card. And often the L1s will get denied on the second year if they're still in that position. They're going to be lenient on that first year L because you're setting up a new office. But then after that, you need to establish a substantial company. So, you know, a lot of people, I get here and they say, well, I'm going to open an oil change. Well, one oil change isn't going to get you an L visa. It might get you an E visa if you're Canadian. But it's not going to get you an L. So that's the thing. EB-5 is the way that an E visa would move to a green card is through what's called the EB-5 program. This is an immigrant investor visa where you need to invest $1,050,000 in any area in the United States. And you can invest $800,000 in what we call a targeted employment area. So these are areas in the United States where they have designated that as a place that needs business investment, and the rate for investing there is a little bit lower. So on an EB-5, you have to have, you know, a company business plan that shows that your company is going to be able to support 10 full-time U.S. workers. This cannot include your family. It cannot include the investor. And then the problem I'm having with EB-5s is they have to know about the wait time. Right now, the processing time for an EB-5 petition is 56 months. So,
Who's going to look into it? That's my point.
oh, there's an entire EB-5. So EB-5s are only done by one unit within the immigration service. All EB-5s go to this one place. And they are extremely difficult visas to put together and to get approved. And even when you get approved, you know, it's a 5-year wait, so.
Well, I know there's a temporary stay. You get it after 18 months when you file the forms. And then?
No,
and then,
you get it after 56 months when you
Okay.
file the forms.
All right.
And
Well-
then you get what's called a conditional status, okay?
Right.
And that conditional status is good for 2 years, and then you have to show that you employed the 10 US workers, and that you have the business, and that your business is operating, and that you're doing the things that you said you were going to do in your business plan. And then you file to remove the conditions, and that takes another 56 months. So right now, the EB-5 program, it really they need to do something about the processing time. I mean, there are no backlogs for the visas unless you're Chinese. Chinese EB-5s are heavily backlogged.
or Indian.
Or, no, just Chinese for that. But, you know, it's a long process, it's a harder process. There is another way to do EB-5s. It's called service center petitions. So there are companies and even governments in the United States, city governments, that set up what are called service centers. Let's say they have a road construction project for the county, and they set up a service center, and then they invite investors to invest in those service centers at the lower rate.
So if they come in, say if someone outside comes in and puts it into a road project that creates 10 jobs, then the rate of return is very low, right? 1.5%. However, the money has to be tied up for 5 years. But then they can invest in a project, and eventually, if it's creating the jobs, can get a green
Oh,
card
yeah,
from the project.
they definitely get a green card from the project. As long as the project, you know, stays in business, employs the 10 US workers. Generally, these projects are very, very large projects. So what they're doing is they're taking a lot of investors, and they're assigning 10 of the employees from that investment to one person, 10 to another person, 10 to another person. So as long as you invest in the correct EB-5 center, you know, you definitely can get a green card. And in some ways, that's more risky on the financial end, but easier than doing an EB-5 for an individual.
Now, this is from a lot of years ago, but I understand there are only 2 state run investment centers in the United States. One's in Michigan and one's in Vermont.
I don't know, I haven't looked at the list lately.
But that's state-owned, and we're one of the unique
I
states that
think there
have it.
are more now.
Okay.
I think there are more now, but yes, I mean, I think that in Detroit, started an EB-5 program, I believe. So, yeah, this is one way to bring in outside investment capital to the
So
US.
if we had projects in Dearborn Heights, we can attract investors to come to some of our projects that need investment money as a way to attract overseas investors.
Yes,
correct?
of course, yeah, you can set up a Dearborn Heights Service Center. And,
Thank you.
You made a key point. Small companies, it's almost impossible to do it. And
for Ls,
yeah,
For
and
Ls.
the consequences are almost nil. I do a lot of business all over the world with, China, other countries, but I do it all through the internet. And I don't need, I guess it doesn't really apply to immigration because I have all those centers over there, and they do it all over there, almost no cost, and no government is involved anywhere. And life goes on. I need a couple $100,000 worth of material. I go to India, make my contacts, send them an email, send them a wire or whatever, I get my materials. None of this immigration stuff happens. So they don't have to be my employees. So for small companies, the consequences, it's not even worth bothering to apply for all this stuff, because you said there's a 20,000 something backlog. Why even bother?
Well, it is important, and we have a lot of contacts throughout the world that ask for investments in the United States, Dearborn Heights, which we will attract a number of investors. I'm going to move on.
well, one thing, Roger,
yes,
one
sorry.
thing that I did say is that it is difficult for the L1, so the person doing an L1 visa has to be committed to setting up a substantial company here in the US. They can't just have like a mom and pop shop. They have to be willing to set up a substantial company. And then the L1 will work for them.
So the U.S. government defines a small company as 400 employees or less. So what do you
No,
consider?
I'm defining small and company like under 10 employees.
Okay, well, then you're differing from the U.S. government.
Okay.
Okay,
In this
so
case,
it's-
yes.
Our definitions are different. So anyway,
Yeah.
Thank you.
but very interesting.
If I can ask the immigration attorneys, if you can maybe share what, everyone could share maybe what majority of cases you handle, or some stories as we wind down. Anyone?
I can start us
Yes.
up top. So I do both criminal defense and immigration. Most of my immigration is family-based. I've done some employment immigration. I have done a little bit of removal in the past. I really don't do it. But I guess my prime niche for immigration would be the crimmigration issues. When I have somebody who's a non-citizen who's charged with a particular crime, so a lot of times somebody's charged with an offense and it's not a triable case despite the presumption of innocence. Maybe they're caught red-handed. So I'm gonna have to do some begging and pleading and hopefully somebody would work with us, right? It's my job to know what to ask for. Sometimes you may, like I said, you may think, oh, I'm pleading this down to a misdemeanor, but that misdemeanor has a fraud element and I got them deported anyway. So it's my job to, make sure whatever we end up resolving to ends up being something that hopefully can keep somebody in the country who may have made a mistake.
And I would say after practicing law 37 years, so many of our people may not be involved, but we have relatives, we have cousins, we have friends that get in trouble. So it's something that's on a green card or something like that. And as an immigrant myself, I do see that the need to have the resources available.
Yeah, I don't really normally practice immigration law. Again, I'm Assistant Corporation Counsel here in Dearborn Heights, so we don't deal with that much immigration issues. But this was definitely informative, even as an attorney. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, our firm, Dagger Crazat Immigration Law, we practice exclusively immigration, and we address all aspects of immigration law, from removal defense to employment-based visas to asylums and TPS. We do it all. And within our firm, we are specialized. So we practice all aspects of immigration law, but we specialize in removal defense. This is the area that I specialize in. And my partner specializes in employment-based law. And we have been doing this for a long time. We offer a very professional and understanding service. We know how hard it is sometimes to get stuck in the immigration proceedings or not having a complete understanding where you're going to end up and trying to make decisions about buying a house, starting a family. I think we understand what that means. And so we care for our clients as well.
Thank you.
What she said, no. So, I mean, because we're partners, obviously everything she said is correct. I focus on employment-based immigration, entertainment visas, investor visas, H-1Bs for professionals, H-2Bs for non-professionals. I also do family immigration, naturalization. We both do waivers. Right now, I'm working with a project called the Project for Immigration Justice for Palestine. And this is a group of about 200 immigration attorneys across the country that have come together, and we're doing pro bono representation of Palestinians who are trying to get relatives out of Palestine. It is extremely challenging. It is extremely tiring. It is like banging your head against a wall. But we are filing humanitarian paroles for these people, which is something we haven't talked about. That's a humanitarian option. We are filing relative petitions. The U.S. Embassy in Cairo has opened and is allowing relative petitions to be filed directly with the embassy for immediate relatives. And, you know, it's very rewarding work. When I make progress, I'll feel good about it.
Thank you, Renee.
And if I just may add.
Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt you. That we are both members of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we are both active in the Michigan chapter as well. And we do take on a lot of pro bono cases. In addition to the work on Palestine, we work with the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, and we do take on pro bono cases.
Yeah, things we haven't talked about are things like VAWA, or Violence Against Women Act, and I-360 petitions, special immigrants, like this, U visas for people that are victims of crime. We do all of this as well. And it is very rewarding work. And I've been practicing immigration law for, 31 years now.
Thank you.
I do mainly family-based immigration, but I do also do a lot of deportation defense and removal defense. And it's a complex area of law. And like my colleagues here said, I mean, people have a tendency to kind of want to cut corners when it comes to immigration, and they will seek the advice of these so-called notaries or these semi-professionals, for lack of a better word, I guess. But a lot of these people, would end up, they have their knowledge is very limited. And a lot of these people end up getting taken advantage of. So I would reiterate the same sentiment, is that seek the advice of a qualified immigration attorney, and, always, be on the safe side as opposed to trying to cut corners, especially with something as important as this, because the outcome of these immigration cases and petitions would have long-ranging effect, if not life-changing effects on a lot of people and families in general.
Thank you. I'm going to have everyone go around and give their name and information. I'm just going to finish up. I really, I was moved by the sharing and separation that the ladies in our audience shared about their families and being separated. I know my parents left me when I was 9 months old in our country to come here to the United States and make a better life for us. I didn't see my parents till I was 5. but I raised 8 children. It's hard for me to think about leaving your children, but I know the consequences of immigration is far-reaching and affects the quality of life of so many people, and there's depression and other things that hit families. So we want to make this available to our citizens of Dearborn Heights to show that we are aware and we are conscious about challenges, and we want to make sure that there's lawyers here that will volunteer to talk to you today, and you can see them at their offices, not free, but you can have resources of people you're confident and can trust, and attorneys you can trust. And I'm going to ask the attorneys, starting with Rod, his full name and telephone number, so you can have those resources to contact as we wind down.
Yeah, Ra'ad Murad, 313-445-8989. Our office is Murad Law on Greenfield between Ford and Warren in Dearborn.
What's your address, Rod?
6140 Greenfield in Dearborn.
Thank you.
Reem Krazat with Dagger Immigration Law. Our phone number is 313-565-6581. Renee, you want to give our address?
Yes, it's Dagger Krazat Immigration Law. And you said Dagger Immigration Law.
Oh, did I?
You left yourself out.
I did. It's okay.
So it's Dagger Krazat Immigration Law. Our address is 19855 West Outer Drive. We're in Suite 104 of the West Building. That's the buildings that are the 3 buildings near the Social Security office on Michigan Avenue.
Mazen Gaith, and I am the principal at Gaith Law PLLC. My address is 1806 North Telegraph Road, Dearborn, Michigan, 48128. I am in the process of moving to a new office, but my phone numbers will stay the same. My contact number for the office is 313-486-0120.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the attorneys for volunteering their time. Hopefully this will be on our website, and we have certain bar associations internationally that may want to see this and reach out to us. We just want to say that Dearborn Heights is receptive to investors and for any needs that you have. Thank you.